You have an online mic?
Well, here's a mic.
Yeah, that's an online mic.
I turned the mic off. I wasn't doing anything through here. I don't know if I turned it on. I didn't go that far. Yeah, it's on. I got the pick. I thought, well, that's too tempting to pass up. You can? Okay.
All right.
You do not want to use this microphone.
I don't know how well it's going to pick up though.
This is a POS microphone.
We may have to do it through yours.
Close this.
Yeah, close that.
Okay.
And then go over to
This one? Something. Just mirror that. Yeah. Default internal.
problem is these headphone and audio. So it's not just picking up the mic.
All right. It's pretty bad. We'll go for it. Okay. And look right at the screen. This seriously has a very narrow field.
What does the
Mic. No, the mic.
mic does?
Yeah. Because I set this off to the side and I've got my other two monitors. And when I'm communicating with others, now they're like, look at the monitor, Jason. All right. So is it already sharing the screen? Oh. That's really not cool.
All those were great.
This will be a good review for you guys then. Probably already experts. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, yeah. You're talking over at Pacific Landing? Oh, okay. Calling Andrew. Good. Still 11 Cubs? Oh. Yeah. That's probably true. We'll probably be done early. This one's not real complicated, but it's just powerful because it's simple. No worries. As long as I got two people still sitting when I'm done, it was a win. Catchy, huh? Yeah. My wife, that's so awesome. I can get 3G in here. I think I won't use that. By the end of it, you'll all be experts if you're not already. Just curious, how many people have already used JSON? You're already experts. That's good. That'll make this easy. So one of its biggest competitors out there for transferring data between systems is XML. And so we want to look at compare it to JSON to XML. What are the advantages, disadvantages? So here's our similarities. They're both text-based. Both are position independent. Both are language independent. Both are self-describing. And what does that mean, self-describing? It means that human or evil. Going on, right? Not bytecode. Yeah, both are defined standards, and both are hierarchical. Any questions on any of those? I guess before I go on, does everybody pretty much understand what every one of those is? Okay. So what are the differences? And this is where it really matters. Here's the reasons why you're going to use one over the other, right? So JSON can be parsed by JavaScript. XML can't. It can be parsed in the browser, but it's not JavaScript. Easy to access. JSON's easy to access data after being parsed. The XML, I wouldn't say it's difficult, but it is more difficult. Not as easy. Another advantage of JSON is it doesn't have the end tag. And if you've got a small little chunk of data like I'm going to show you, it doesn't matter. Because there's not enough bytes there to matter. But if you start getting large amounts of data, those bytes are going to add up. And yes, even with our fast internet, it's still a waste. So that's one of the reasons JSON uses less memory, just because it's smaller footprint. It's quicker to read and write. This isn't you typing. This is the system. Has anybody done any DOM manipulation with the XML? Years ago, many years ago, 10 years ago, I was doing some more stuff. And we built these three systems, three different databases, and we were transferring messages between them. Each system had an in and out box. And we all exclusively used XML for transferring data around. And it was crazy. We had a 1.5 meg file come in, and I had to increase the session user memory to over 150 meg just to process that single file, because the parser was so, bad. And it's probably not as big a problem nowadays, but it's still there. So here's our examples. So you can see JSON's really easy to read. The XML is also still pretty easy to read. You can see pretty easily pick out the to column, the from, the heading, and the body. But you do notice even in this short segment, the XML is longer. I put both of these in a file just because I was curious what would the file size be. Both were under 1 KB, so who cares, right? When it's small. As it grows and gets more complicated, it becomes more of a problem. So I want to take a look at what it would take to parse XML in the browser using JavaScript. So here's an example. So right here is the XML that we're going to parse. It's the exact same from the last slide, just flattened out to make it easier to fit in the slide. But it's still this exact same note. So here we have to do this if DOM parser. This is just purely for Internet Explorer. Most of your browsers are going to hit in the positive section. Internet IE is going to hit down here. It just does it a little differently. So we build a parser, and then we call parse from string, and we pass in the text that was here, right here, and we tell it its type is text XML. That gives us our document. Down here, this is standard JavaScript. Is there anybody not familiar with document.getElementById? Okay. So what that is that's core JavaScript way of grabbing an element in the HTML. So what we're doing here is we're going to go find that element, and then that element's going to have the ID of 2, and the inner HTML, what's inside of that, we're going to set to the value that's in the XML doc. We're going to get the element by the tag name, so we're looking for the 2 element, and we're looking for the first in that array, and the first child node, and we're getting the value. So what I want you to look at right here is this line. Compare that to what I'm going to show you in the next slide, which is how you access the exact same thing in JSON. That's not complicated, but that's a fair bit of coding, and you've got to go through and get the right element order right. So now let's look at JSON. So still same example, same note that we had from 2 slides ago. Just basic, right? To, from, heading, and a body. So here in our script, there's our note. Put it into our variable raw data. This time we call JSON.parse. Because we're in JavaScript, we're able to just use JSON.parse. We didn't have to import any external libraries. It's just there, it's native, ready to go. So it now takes your raw text and now it's converted it into a JSON object. So now it knows how, now we can just start accessing it. So here we're using that same document, got element by ID again, with a 2, same inner HTML, but notice this. Before we had a whole line, now we just have note.to to access that field. So it's a lot simpler. Any questions on that? All right, so now we know why we would want to use it. It's lighter weight. Yeah, go ahead. Sure. So this is the script section right there. Sure. Yeah, sure. So it's just standard JavaScript. So I put it in line, just for presentation. But yeah, you could easily strip it off if it's reusable. If it's sixes when you want to split it out or not. So, yes. Yeah, and then if you did split it out, you'd just have a script import tag, right? Any other questions? So what you'd have, you're back here in your object. And then just change that way. All right. Any others? Okay. The not the data, but the all right. So syntax is name value pairs, like we just saw there, the 2, the name, then the value. Um, on the name, you always need to use quotation marks. Data is separated by commas. Curly braces hold objects, and we're going to go through a bunch of different examples. You'll start seeing these. Square brackets hold arrays. So let's talk about the curly braces back here. we just have a single object. So there's our name value pair. Two, Paul and Fred. Straightforward. So we've got 6 different data types: number, string, Boolean, array, object, and null. I love JavaScript and the null. So here's how you do a number. Numbers can be integers or floating points. It doesn't allow you to put in nan. It has to be an actual number. And you notice it doesn't have quotes around it. It's an actual number. Try to put nan there. It'll work. They can be positive or negative. Doesn't matter. String, just Unicode characters, sequence of Unicode characters. Delimited, double quotation marks, but you can also use a single. You can use the backslash escape character. If you've got some funky characters in your string you need to keep. And then there's an example. So Boolean, true or false are the only 2 values. See there? Live. So here's the arrays. So we've got an address property. So this address is a property of another object, right? And in it, it's got you've got street address. You got just 2 different properties. Should have put in multiple elements there. Show you more of the array. Yes. Yeah. Here's one with the children down there. That's what I should have had up above. Oh, and the phone numbers. So that's the better example of the array. So our phone numbers is our property. Here's your bracket to start your array. And then here's your first JSON object. And there's your second. Then there's an empty array. You would. This is just a fragment. So this would still be encased in your bracket notation. So phone numbers would just be a property, just like from is on this one. Yeah. I had to reduce it down for space. I should have showed the whole thing, but that other fragment snippet, yes, exactly. And then there's our null. So empty value, you use the word null. Because if you did, what would happen if you put in just 2 single quotes? Well, it'd be an empty string, right? Yeah, it wouldn't actually be null. Oh, yeah. If you put quotes around the word null, then it'd be a string null. So there is a difference. Yeah, right there. Yeah. So we use JSON on my client quite a few different places. We do a lot of RESTful calls between the server and the web page, just because it is so lightweight. It's nice to be able to send over and then JavaScript logic on the application. To be able to do whatever you need to do. Also, in Angular, it if you haven't done Angular, it's really neat. You don't actually end up seeing the JSON unless you've been building the backend server stuff. It's really nice. So whenever you're creating, so we talked about taking that script segment and breaking it out into its own JavaScript file. You can do the same thing with JSON. The extension you want to use is just .json. Your MIME type is application JSON, so if you're pulling it in somewhere. Here's how we parse. Just want to go over this again because I had it in the example, but it's really simple. JSON.parse and pass in a string. As long as it's valid JSON, it's going to parse it. Here's the different web browsers that support it. It's pretty much everywhere where there's JavaScript, it's going to be supported. So here's another example. So similar to the one we did before, you notice this is, it does say XML HTTP request, even though we're still doing JSON. Important parts are down here. Okay, so this is looking to make sure it's ready and make sure there wasn't an error. And then we'll go out and get our element in our HTML again. Pull in that raw JSON, or that's our element name. There's our inner HTML, and then again, we'll go into our XML HTTP data. So there's our JSON object, and pulling out the response text out of it. There's the parse line. So what this line's doing here, it's going to dump out what we get back from the server, just raw, just right to the screen, so we can see it. And then here, we're actually going to parse it into the JSON object and start looping through those different records. And basically, I'm going to show you this here in just a second, but basically what we're building is we're building an HTML table with all the rows of all the different JSON data. So here we have an array, and we're pulling out that specific record. Somebody asked earlier, how do you get the element in the array? It is right there. Fine. And then here we're just going to build an HTML row and insert in the JSON data. So we've got record.name. That's our JSON element, or object, and then the property name. There's our object again, property city, object, and country. And then we're just going to add that row, or add all of those rows into the body table. And then you can see down here, that's where we're getting the data from. So here's another example. Oh, that's not the one I wanted, sorry. Wrong one. Okay, so here, that last slide was a snippet. Here is the full solution. So here's our function we just looked at. And then now we're going to take a look at what it actually builds. So end up the page, when we hit the load JSON button, it goes out and fetches the JSON data. So when we call this function load.json, which is right here on our on-click element, going to go and pull the data from the server and then add it to the page. So here's where we dumped our raw. Here's what we got from the server, and here's our parsed format. Pure JavaScript. Yep. Yeah, so normally I don't use pure JavaScript when I'm fetching data. I'm going to use something like jQuery or Angular or something like that. But for these examples, we wanted to stick with pure JavaScript, so it was something everybody could use. So it's pretty fast, pretty lightweight. I mean, fetched the data from the server and parsed it and displayed it pretty quick. Any questions on that? What else can I show you? That is honestly JSON in a nutshell. It's that simple. Sure. You want the full HTML or the slide snippet? Okay. Okay. So here's our function. Put JSON. Was there any particular part you were wanting to look at? Oh, just quick overview. Yes. So over here, let me show you the whole thing. Here is our HTML, right? Here's our body. And our button, one we're interested in right here. And it's got an on-click event that calls load.json. And since that function exists, it's a global function, which, okay, what's wrong with this? Global function, right? Naughty, naughty me. So now if somebody was to take my page and consume it in another one using Ajax, and they had another function called load.json, which one would it load? Which one would it call, mine or theirs? Last one wins, right? So. Also, I really don't, here's the big advantage of using the libraries for doing the fetching the data, the Ajax call. Then you don't have to worry about ActiveX object and HTTP request. So if I was going to do this in jQuery, it would just be jQuery.ajax, and then I would specify the URL, the data type, an exception handler, and a non-success handler, and I'd be done. I wouldn't have to worry about is a user in IE, is he in Chrome, is he in Safari? It just works. So I'm a big advocate for jQuery. If you haven't used it, highly recommend it. So I'm not a huge fan of JavaScript, I'll be honest with you. But once I started using jQuery, I became a fan. Because then it took away a lot of the problems and just made it do what I wanted it to do. I didn't have to worry about every little odd case. So. So it doesn't necessarily need to be in its own file. It's right here. You could actually define it as a JavaScript or you basically just define it as a function. And yeah, and you give it, so it'd be like var function, var name equals function, and then you're going to define in your function, you're basically making a JavaScript object, as close as you can get anyway, and then you would call methods on that object. So yeah, that's what makes it, it's named more than it is local. It's still, that object still exists in global memory, but you wouldn't have any conflicts because now it's under the name. So if I did JSON, Fred dot load JSON, and I could have a George.json, I wouldn't accidentally call the wrong load JSON. That was actually covered in other classes, so I don't have it in here. That's a good question, though. Result. Who wants to use JavaScript now or JSON now instead of? Java. So one of the things that I like about JSON versus XML is it seems like every time we start talking XML, especially if I'm pulling data from a third-party site, then we have to start talking about DTD, something to validate that whatever the XML going back and forth is valid. Don't have that with JSON. It is what I send you. It's simple enough to parse. If it's right, it's right. You know, it works. I don't have to go worrying about endless detail like you do with XML. Because XML can get extremely complicated. You can set up different parsing strategies. So you wouldn't have to necessarily if you go out parsing um, JSON you just call. This is not going to be then you're going to change your strategy how you're fetching the data. So, any other questions? It's really nice because in your controller, JSON's coming in. So it would generate the classes for you. Not off the top of my head, I guess that kind of question. It feels like a code smell. Yeah. Anybody else? Hey, well, I guess that's everything then. It's pretty quick.